Hello. Inflation remains a concern as prices continue to rise. Core CPI is at 3.3, headline CPI is at 2.7, showing that inflation isn't slowing down. In the short term, people are expecting prices to keep increasing, which could lead to more spending now and higher inflation later. Long term, rising inflation expectations suggest people may believe high inflation is here to stay, making it harder to control in the future. On our first slide, again, all three of these slides are from Apollo and Torsten Slok. Um, the headline CPI is at 2.7. The difference between headline and core reflects how volatile food and energy costs can sometimes mask the underlying trends in inflation. What's more concerning is that both measures show signs of rising again, which suggests inflationary pressures are not going away as quickly as hoped. For everyday people, this means that prices for goods and services could continue to climb, making it harder for families to keep up with their expenses. Policymakers at the Federal Reserve are now faced with the challenge of managing this inflation while trying to avoid slowing down the economy too much. If they fail to strike the right balance, it could impact jobs, wages, and economic growth. Now, the short term inflation expectations, as measured by the University of Michigan's consumer surveys, are also on the rise again. This means that many people believe prices for goods and services will increase over the next year. When consumers expect prices to go up, it can influence their spending and saving habits. For example, people may decide to buy things sooner rather than later to avoid paying higher prices in the future, which can drive even more demand and potentially push prices up further. On the other hand, some may save less because they feel their money won't go as far later. These changing behaviors can create challenges for the economy as inflation expectations can sometimes become self fulfilling. For policymakers like the Federal Reserve, keeping inflation expectations under control is critical because if people believe inflation will stay high, it becomes much harder to bring actually inflation down. Long run inflation expectations, also tracked by the University of Michigan, are also starting to rise, which means people believe prices will keep increasing steadily over the next 10 to 15 years. These expectations are important because they reflect how confident people are that the inflation will eventually come down and stay low. If consumers and businesses start to believe that higher inflation is here to stay, it can cause lasting changes to their behavior. For instance, businesses may raise prices more often. Workers might demand higher wages to keep up with rising costs, and families may save less because they feel their money will lose value over time. This can create a cycle where inflation feeds on itself and becomes much, much harder to control. For policymakers like the Federal Reserve, keeping long term inflation expectations low is critical because once people's beliefs about inflation are anchored at those higher levels, it becomes much more difficult to restore stability. Balancing this challenge requires careful action to avoid hurting economic growth while still preventing inflation from getting out of control. Thanks for taking the time. And if you have any questions, please let me know.